All right, welcome everybody. This is episode 9, which is hard to believe already, of our summer podcast series. We have another great guest. We have another former player and someone who is also now in the coaching profession and has been for more than 20 years. He is former Alabama Crimson Tide player Darby Rich, who happened to be in school the exact same time I was in school. I know we probably don't want to admit it, Darby, but you and I are the same age. We're in the same generation. But I think the good news is we have a good historical perspective of what Alabama basketball used to be for all those new fans now that weren't alive when we saw what Alabama used to do in the 80s and 90s. For those that are not aware, Darby is the current strength and conditioning coach at the University of Texas. We're going to get into his coaching career as well. But first, Darby, thank you again for squeezing us in. I know you're in the middle of moving from Memphis to Austin, so thank you again for joining us for this podcast.
No, thank you for having me. And, especially with the truly great players that you'd have an option to talk to today.
You're one of them, man. You are.
Yeah, I was on some great teams and a part of some great teams, and I'm grateful for that. But you obviously have many, many more great guys that play in the NBA that you could talk to. So I appreciate you having me on.
No, I really appreciate the support you've given us because I know when we started really doing things and promoting things on the X account, you were very interactive and you gave us feedback, and I really appreciate all the support you've given us on that, and I'm really happy to see the interest from the former players and coaches. So I'm very proud of that fact because that's what we want to do. We want everyone to understand that while Alabama's on a historic run, Alabama basketball has been relevant for a long time. Now, we went through a little bit of a dark period, but we're back. But there is a deep history, which is a history that you were a part of. But for those that are not familiar, I kind of want to get into your story here because I know you're originally from South Carolina and
Right.
you played at Riverside High School in Greer, South Carolina. And believe this would have been in the mid to late 80s.
Right.
How did you get on the Alabama recruiting radar, and who was your lead recruiter? Walk us through that story.
Well, actually, Wimp ended up being the first person to see me, and
Ah, okay.
this I mean, I tell the story in small circles, but in '87 was the really, really good team, until maybe this year, uh, except for the team that almost beat Bobby Knight's team. I think the Alabama '87 team with McKee and Connor and Farmer and Godfrey and that crew, was one of the better teams ever. And coach was losing a lot of guys on that team, Farmer and Godfrey in particular. And I think he was searching over the South for maybe a Caucasian guy to sit on the bench. And I mean, and what I didn't realize at the time, but I found out later is John Pelfrey that ended up playing at Kentucky. They were really recruiting him hard, and John kind of blew up that year and went from a guy that Kentucky was keeping tabs on to a guy that Pitino went and got and signed. And so coach had to go looking a little farther down the line and came to an all-star game and saw me and sent Greg Polinsky back a day later to, kind of follow up and see if he saw the same thing. And within about a week, they had offered me, and it just everything kind of clicked in place. I flew in about 2 weeks later, and it wasn't a very long recruitment, and
Wow.
but it ended up being something good, especially for me. I don't know if it was any good for them or not.
Well, so there in South Carolina, any interest from any of the home state schools besides
Yeah,
Alabama?
Clemson was the school that I grew up a Clemson fan, and
Okay.
I grew up in a kind of a small farm town in South Carolina, and the farmers were all Clemson graduates or had ties to Clemson, and they were the first school to actually offer me, and as a junior. And during the summer between my junior and senior year, I landed on a guy's foot at a camp and sprained my ankle really bad, and didn't really have a great summer after that on like the AAU circuit, which is not what it is now. You played about 2 weekends, but just I was not healthy. I probably shouldn't have played, but nowadays if you get hurt, you don't play. Back then, when you get hurt, you did. And maybe I shouldn't have played, but that's what you did, and that's what I wanted to do. And Clemson kind of backed off of me, and it wasn't until they about halfway through my senior season, they kind of came back in and started actively recruiting me again. And it kind of had rubbed me the wrong way.
Hmm.
And I kind of, how it goes. I really thought in the end I would end up at Clemson. But when Coach came in, the Alabama thing just worked out. South Carolina, there were two wing players in my class, Barry Manning and Michael Glover from the Columbia area, that they really recruited hard. And so, South Carolina never really went after me very hard, just the courtesy in-state type recruiting. And it just, the timing was perfect for, Coach to come in, and we got it done pretty quick.
So when you came in for the official visit in Tuscaloosa, what did you like about your visit?
Pretty much everything. I actually came in, the season was over, and
Oh,
I
okay.
went to I came in the weekend or the week of the awards banquet, and got to meet all those guys. And they had just had, even though I think that season was disappointing because that was probably a Final Four team that didn't make it, there was, the feeling around Alabama basketball at that time was unbelievable. And you had Derek McKee coming back at the time, because this is before the deal with the agent Norby Walters, and Cheatham and all those guys were already signed. And so they're recruiting me to come be a part of a great class and be a part of the next year. It's either going to be, I guess Danny Manning was gone. I mean, Derek would have been the odds-on guy to be National Player of the Year probably in '88.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're coming in to join a team that just had a great season, that now has maybe the National Player of the Year, and you're going to be a part of a big freshman class that was, really highly acclaimed. And so it was a great fit. And obviously Derek's thing happened in the summer, and it didn't work out that way. But that was, the sell job was, things were in place. We had that one hiccup in '88 before the run started again. But Alabama basketball was already in a really, really good position. And if you put Derek back in that spot, it's a long, long run of, uninterrupted success.
Well, I remember, so, I agree. The '87 team, that's my favorite team of my childhood growing up. That's the one I love the most. And I agree with you. That one hurt the most when they got upset in Louisville. We
Right.
had the hiccup the next year because you're right, because of the unfortunate circumstances with Derek. But now, so you and Melvin were in the same recruiting class then, weren't you? Melvin
Right.
Cheatham?
So Cheatham and I were in the same class, and we can talk about it now. So Melvin and I met at orientation. How I'm sure they still have it, but freshman orientation in Tuscaloosa, and we came in. We didn't know each other. Melvin's from Louisiana, and I'm from South Carolina. And Coach had us rooming. I know Melvin was supposed to room with Marcus Campbell, I think, and I was supposed to room with a junior college transfer named Kimball Smith. That Kimball left that semester, I think, that first year. But Melvin and I met at orientation, and after spending about a day and a half together, went up to Wimp's office in Coleman and told him that we wanted to room together, that we needed to change all this roommate stuff. And we did. We ended up living together all 4 years in Bryant Hall.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and now, Melvin has lived in Austin pretty much most of his post-Alabama career, other than some time in Minnesota. And so we're now both in Austin, and it's not like we've reconnected, because we never disconnected, but a lot of phone calls and text have now become, we're going to see each other face to face. And it's really neat that it's actually 37 years later during the summer that we've kind of been able to reconnect, and it's been a lot of fun. We've already spent more time together in the last month than we probably have in the last 10 years.
Man, that's awesome. You guys probably feel like you're 19 again. It's like your freshman year at Alabama again because you get to hang out together. I texted Melvin before earlier today, just let him know we were going to record. So he gave the big thumbs up. He was happy about that. So that's great. I'm glad that Melvin's there in Austin and you're in Austin and then I didn't realize you were roommates until you told me that. So I had no
Right.
idea. I did not realize that. All right, so let's talk about the years that you spent in Tuscaloosa because yes, they had the hiccup in the '88 season, but after that, Alabama basketball became Alabama basketball again. You were a part of teams that won. Let me make sure I get all the accolades correct. So won 3 SEC tournaments, played in
Right.
4 SEC tournament championship games, went to the
Correct.
NCAA tournament 4 years, and went to three Sweet 16s, I believe.
Two Sweet
Two,
16s.
two sweet, okay, and two Sweet 16s. So I would say that despite the 1 year hiccup, the ship got righted. Wanted to ask you what are your what are some of the most memorable things about that great run that you were a part of, that you were with some of those teams and all the things that that group went through?
I remember two things, and some of it's good, and I say good. After Coach Perkins left, the run with Coach Curry was not obviously as good as Alabama football people expect, and no different than it is a lot of places where football is kind of king. Uh, the fact that football was not at its elite status and we were winning, I think, just like anywhere, football's not great and basketball is winning. The fans really, you attach yourself to a winner. And the thing I remember is just people act like it's a big deal to sell out Coleman now, and maybe not now, but you know, I mean, during those days, the student section was full to the very top roof, uh, long before tip off, and I mean, it just the crowd support we had during those years was just phenomenal. And obviously, Went was a big part of it. With the plaid sport coats, and I guess we even had the plaid jump circle for a couple years. Uh, but the fan support during that time was just, I think winning in Coleman at that time was as hard as winning, in Rupp Arena or anywhere else. And then just as many guys that came through there, and people kind of forget it. Everybody remembers, Ori and Spreewell and Hollywood and those guys that were, high draft picks. But you had Keith Askins and Ansley, and then Marcus Webb and Roy Rogers. I mean, there were, I think, I played with 9 different guys who, legitimately played in the NBA for a minute. And that's a pretty good run to have that many guys playing the NBA in that short of time.
So you brought up a good point. So I remember during that stretch, the sellout crowds at Coleman, and they were selling it out on the midweek games. And I
Right.
think I think it was the 88-89 season. They did the plaid and parquet promotion, and I think they ended with like 8 straight sellouts, and one of them was on a Sunday or something. I mean, it was incredible. I remember the crowds because I came to every game that I could, and then I came when I was a student. I came in the student section, but I remember some of those crowds, and they got pretty raucous. I remember there was one game in particular when Chris Jackson was a freshman and he came into Coleman, and I can't remember exactly what he was averaging, but it was like in the 20s or like 29 points a game. I think Alabama held him
Right.
like 17 or 16, but that place went crazy. And I think that might have been the night that they had the Wimp Sanderson mass. I can't remember. They're all starting to blur together now, but I agree with you. During that period, Coleman Coliseum was a difficult place to play because the crowd was there. It was an exciting time for Alabama basketball. And again, it's something that this young generation has no clue and didn't realize. And that's one of the things that we're trying to highlight to let them know and see what we went through. On that run that Alabama went when they won 3 straight SEC tournaments, I know there was one in particular. I want to talk about the 89-90 team when they won the SEC tournament, but
Okay.
then the NCAA gave them a number 7 seed. I mean, I always thought the 89-90 team was one of the best Alabama teams I've ever seen. I mean, the
Right.
87 team was great, but I also thought the 89-90, you were a member of that team. And then to see Alabama win the tournament, get sent out to the West as a 7 seed, but then go on that great run. how did the team feel? What were they thinking when they unveiled the NCAA bracket and Alabama after winning the tournament and after having such great regular season wins, you're number 7 seed, you get to go out to California?
You know, I think that back in that time, the seating and everything was not as big a deal as it is now. It may be with the fans and really the basketball people. I don't remember it being like, as a team, it being that big a deal that we were number 7 seed and got sent out. We were a really good team. The SEC was good. I mean, it was going to be hard at that time to go, you know, how many, that was before Arkansas and South Carolina. So you would have been a 10-team league playing 18 games. And,
Yep.
you weren't going to go 17-1. And, if you went 12-6, it was a good year, and you're going to be seeded 5, 6, 7, 8, somewhere like that. I don't remember it. Nowadays, if you're really good and you're a 7 seed, it's like a big slap in the face. But, I don't remember 30 years ago there being like some, oh, we'll show them.
Oh, okay.
It was like, we won the tournament. We felt good. That team, obviously that was before Sprewell, but that was David Benoit and Robert and Melvin, obviously.
Yep.
And then Keith Askins was a senior on that team. And so that was a really good team, but I don't remember leaving to go out to California, like with any kind of, we got to prove anything.
Okay.
But, we went out there and won the first game and obviously got the Arizona team that was supposed to handle us quite easily, apparently. And
it was the other way around.
We played as good a game that day as, maybe in my entire time at Alabama. I mean, heck, I got in the NCAA tournament game, so we had to have played pretty well for me to get to check in at some point.
Let me ask you this: as a former player who was a part or played for Coach Sanderson for all those years, what did he do differently, or did he do anything differently for preparation for the SEC tournament? Because that became one of his legacies, that you knew when Alabama got to the SEC tournament, by golly, if they didn't win it, they're going to be playing on Sunday, because he did it 9 out of 12 years, which is just incredible.
Right. Well, what Coach did, and before I got into being a strength coach, I was an assistant basketball coach, and still in the way it is now, I'm pretty involved in every aspect of the program. The thing that Coach did, and always, with the people I work for, I bring this to the table before the tournament every year, is Coach treated every game like it was a championship game. So on, that was, I guess SEC tournament finished on Saturday then, or was it Sunday? I think it was.
It was
Saturday.
still Sunday. It was Sunday.
It was Sunday.
Yeah.
If we played, and we were fortunate, I guess I don't remember ever having to play on Thursday. It was always Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We only had to play 3 games every year.
That's right.
But Friday's game was a championship. The whole week was not about let's win this game and then start thinking about who we might have to play. Like from the moment we finished on the Saturday before, the lead into the first round was only about that game. And Coach would say, if you don't win this game, you don't play anymore. So this is the championship game. The minute it was over, Saturday became the championship game. And it was, it's easy to say teams don't look ahead, but I think teams do look ahead, and he just did not let that happen. Every time we took the floor in the tournament was the championship game. And, he'd bring us back down to earth. And then the next day was our championship game. And then the next day. And, I think if that Arkansas game hadn't been such a unbelievable, emotional game in 92, there's no reason why that, we end up getting beat by Kentucky 20. But I think it was a 2-point game at halftime in 92. And we ran out of gas the next day. And I think it was from the semifinal game the day before against Arkansas. We were just kind of on, but I think Coach's magic was every single game was a championship game. And that's how we went and played them.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the semifinal game in '92 against Arkansas. I kind of want to circle back to that because I've had some really good conversations with Coach these last 6 months, and he's been great to us too as well. But Coach always regards that semifinal game against Arkansas, the one where Elliott Washington hits the last second three-pointer, as the greatest SEC tournament game he's ever seen. Now, I know you also had a special part in that because we've talked about this on the side before, but you found yourself kind of thrust into a pivotal role going into the semifinal because of an injury to a teammate. Kind of walk us through exactly what happened leading up to that, and then what you contributed in that big game against Arkansas, because that was a slugfest.
Well, that was my senior year, and I kind of fluctuated between being in the main rotation and kind of being, if Wimp could have played five guys the whole game, he would have. And he was usually forced to play seven. Well, most of my senior year, I was kind of like number 8 or number 9. So, it's rare that guys can play all 40 minutes, but, like Sprewell and Hollywood did a few times. But Andre Perry, who was our, one of our main front court guys, actually broke his foot in our first game with Florida in the Friday game. And so that took a guy off the board, which meant Robert was going to play more center, and we were going to play a little bit differently against Arkansas. And so, I went from being, number 8 or number 9, now falling into 7, where, I probably am going to get to play. And it was just the kind of game. I mean, the game was in the 80s, back when, a lot of games weren't played in the 80s. And it was a racehorse type game. And I mean, golly, when you talk about, I think there were 8 or 9. There were times in that game where you may have had 9 NBA guys on the floor at one time together. And so, I happened to, I don't know that I wouldn't have had what you would consider a great game by any real player standard. But for, a role player to come in, I think I scored 2 points and grabbed a few rebounds, got a couple of assists, just what I would love for, whether I'm at Texas or Memphis or wherever I'm at, if your guys down the bench come in and contribute and don't turn the ball over, that's what you need. And, that's kind of what I did that day. It was one of the few times. I mean, I love being on the great teams that won the championships, but, as nice as it is to have a ring, sometimes the team can win and, the coaches can say, you contributed in practice and you got us ready, but you never feel like you really, really helped win the game. And that was one of the days where I really felt like in a 1-point game that I did have a little bit of impact on the game.
I remember watching that game. Again, that was the rubber match between Alabama and Arkansas. That was Arkansas's first year in the conference. And you're right. You talk about some players on both teams. Those 3 games were like 3 of the best games you'll ever see during a season that Alabama and Arkansas played that year. And I agree with you. That semifinal game just took so much out of everyone emotionally and physically. I agree. I don't think there was much left in the tank to go against Kentucky. Let me ask one more tournament question. This is more NCAA tournament related. So, we always, for decades, well, for my lifetime and your lifetime until this last year, it always seemed like Alabama basketball was just cursed. They were never going to get to the Final Four, no matter what great teams Alabama rolled out there. And there were some teams that could have gotten to the Final Four, and I think had the talent maybe even win it all. But through circumstance, bad timing, injuries, whatever, it just didn't happen. How I'm not going to ask frustrating, but how disappointing on those teams that you were on to see it end at the Sweet 16?
I think it was really, really tough on the 90 team because, that's the team we just talked about that beat Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get Loyola in that next game. People can argue back and forth all day long if coach played the game right, slowing it down. And, the bottom line is we were better than Loyola. And if you go back and watch the game, it was our game. We pretty well controlled the tempo, controlled the game. And, I mean, everybody loves to talk about referees, this, that, and the other, but there were some calls not made late in that game that if you just call the fouls that should be called, then we win that game. Now we would have had to play the great UNLV team the next round. So trying to pretend like, just we beat Loyola and we make the Final Four, we would have had even bigger, monster to fight in the next round. And then in '91 when we lost to Arkansas, they kicked our butts. So we went over to Charlotte, and that was just that's what set up the good games in '92. Was Todd Day and Lee Mayberry and those guys. I mean, they killed us over there in Charlotte. And so, I think there was a lot of come to reckoning over that summer and going into that year with Arkansas coming in the conference. And there may have been times that year they were ranked first in the country, I would think. And I don't remember that. Somebody with record book knowledge could look that up. But, we spent a lot of time that summer talking about Arkansas. And, we played those 3 games you're talking about. So I would say there was a lot of heartbreak on, in 90. 91, they beat us. What do you say when you get beat like that? So, and then the next year in 92, we lost to North Carolina in the second round, and they were really good. So, I think the heartbreaker was losing to South Alabama that first year in
the 89,
in the '89. If there's any game outside of the Loyola game that hurt, it was losing that game to South Alabama in Atlanta.
If Alabama would have held on and won that one, then you would have got Michigan, the one that went on to win the NCAA tournament that year.
Right, and that was no, sorry, that was a really good Alabama team too. It kind of got washed in this, it's got washed out because it didn't make it out of the first round. But that team was almost the same as the '89 team. The '90 team. I don't remember if Benoit was on the team yet then. Maybe he was, but that team, that was a really, really good team. That's kind of, because it didn't do as much in the postseason, it's kind of gone, been lost in history. That was still a really good team.
I always thought the '90 team, the one we just talked about, I also always thought that's one of the most underrated Alabama teams ever, because I saw a lot of those games in person, and that was one heck of a team. And if you go back and actually look at who all you guys played, you had some high quality victories. You beat Clemson, which won the ACC that year. You beat the tar out of North Carolina and Coleman. I remember LSU came in with Stanley Roberts, Shaquille O'Neal, and Chris Jackson. You beat them by 15. All right. You win the SEC tournament, you take down Arizona. I always felt, and maybe it's just my bias, I don't know, maybe it's crimson colored glasses, but one of the teams I always look at is the '90 team. And I always felt had you dropped that team in any other region besides the West, because I agree you still have UNLV, I think that team matches up well with any of the other 3 Final Four teams, and might have had a chance to punch their way through. But that's another one of the great what ifs of Alabama basketball. Let me transition to this. I want to ask you this. So the '92, I know, is your last year. When did you, Darby, start entertaining the idea that you wanted to coach? Because you've been a coach for a long time, so I was just curious when that I know desire to do that popped up, and then kind of walk us through your path to where you are now, because you've become quite successful in your career.
Well, it was, and I'm not even sure, to be honest. I had redshirted, the year at Alabama, and so in '92 was a 5th year for me. Cheatham was gone, and I had 3 things in my mind. I wanted to be in sports. I knew that, and so I either wanted to play, coach, or that's when the agent thing was starting to become a sports agent was kind of becoming a thing in the world. We hear about all these guys now, but back then that was not the biggest thing. I'm not even sure that probably Derek's scandal, it kind of woke people up to the fact that there were even sports agents. It just wasn't something that is as big a deal as it is now. But I wanted to do something where I could, be involved in sports somehow. It had been my whole life. And so I actually finished in 92, stayed in Tuscaloosa in 93 to take the LSAT. And so it was, can you get overseas somewhere and play? Obviously, the NBA was never going to be in the cards. Maybe you can get a coaching job, or if not, let's see if we can get in law school at Alabama. And I clerked there in town at the Tuscaloosa County Courthouse while I was
Oh,
studying to take the LSATs, and kept myself in shape playing both at Coleman, and then I don't know why, but they would still let me in the rec center, and so I was going up there and playing. And anyway, it was kind of crazy. So if we get into like March, and I end up getting accepted into law school. So now it looks like, well, we're going to go to law school. Well, then the team that Melvin was playing for in Greece uh, contacted me, and it was kind of a weird deal. At the time, you could only have one American per team over there. Uh, and now the rules are a little bit different. Some of them have two, three, but at the time they could only have two. Excuse me, one. And because I was adopted, like literally adopted, they were wanting to see if I was willing to let them change a birth certificate and
oh
bring me
goodness.
over as a European, and not because if it doesn't matter if you're American, if you have like a lineage that still counts and you don't count as the
Oh,
American. And and so and honestly I was thinking about it because I mean, you're 23 years old. I mean, the world is just it's different then than it was now. The problem there was Melvin was playing really, really well, and I knew he was fixing to leave to like move up into a higher level over there. And so I think they were basically bringing me over to maybe keep him happy, uh, so that they could re-sign him to another contract. And I knew he was leaving, and so I didn't want to get myself in a situation where I go over there, Melvin signs with a bigger team in a better league, and it's like, oh man, we signed this guy, we don't need him here, and gets it home. Anyway, about the same time, Steve McLean, who is he's actually on the staff here at Texas now as an assistant coach, was a good friend or of Greg Polinsky on our staff at Alabama at the time. And he was looking to fill a young assistant spot on his staff at Hutchinson Community College in Kansas. And so we go from spending 6 months going, if any of the three happen, we'll just take whatever happens. And then within about a 1 month period at the end of March going into April, there's all three things. We've been now accepted in law school. There's an offer, as crazy as it sounds, to go to Greece and play. And Coach McLean had offered me a job to come out to Kansas. And
wow.
I was the playing was pretty much off the table. I knew what Melvin was going to do, and I just didn't want to get into a bad spot. And Dean Jones, who was actually like the faculty rep for the athletic department that was in the law school at the time, I went to see him to kind of discuss, what my options would be. And we talked, and I don't know if this was official or this what he told me to get me out of his office that day, but he said, Darby, I'm going to make your acceptance good for 5 years. So you go play, you go coach. If at any point within the next 5 years you want to enter with the first year class, then I'll hold your acceptance those five
Oh,
years.
wow.
And so it was a big weight off my shoulders because, you don't just turn down law school, uh, especially to go coach junior college basketball in Kansas. But Dean Jones made it, an unbelievable gesture to me that kind of was like, okay, let me go try this. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I'll come back, be in Tuscaloosa, and we'll move forward. And went out to Hutchinson. We won a national championship on my first year. Uh, and it just kind of took off from there, and we never looked back again.
Wow, that's incredible. So when you were at Hutchinson, though, I know you were an assistant coach, but that's also where you started or working on the strength and conditioning. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, there was our head coach, Steve McLean. We had another full-time assistant, Phil Anderson, and then myself. And, strength conditioning, like when I was at Alabama, we obviously had Rocky Colburn, who, I think if you talk to the Alabama guys from back in the day during my time, and if anybody asks you who was the unsung hero, that's, somebody that didn't wear a jersey and name's not Wimp, who is the guy that was a big part of all those championships? Probably 9 out of 10 would say Rocky. And but basketball strength conditioning was not, what it is today, where everybody has their own guy and he doesn't have to work any other sports and that type deal. Rocky was Rich Wingo's assistant, but he did a heck of a job with us. Well, anyway, I get out the hutch, and more because I was the only guy on the staff who had ever lifted weights, and I was young and just had come out of a collegiate basketball program that did. Coach McLean just, that was kind of one of my assignments. You're going to be it wasn't even being called a strength coach. It's just part of your assistant coaching duties is going to be
okay.
strength conditioning. Just like scouting, recruiting, washing clothes, you're going to do the strength. And so, I basically just kind of utilized what we had. It wasn't much, probably like a lot of, not even as good as a lot of old high school gyms. We just had a few benches and dumbbells and barbells, but we did the best we could. Fast forward 4 years, I'm at Sam Houston State now with Bob Marlin, and kind of the same thing. It's a smaller school. There's one strength coach. He really only cares about football, being in Texas. And so I end up being in the weight room a lot with those guys, just because I feel like we needed somebody in there that, basically gave a crap. And so, one thing led to another, and, I'm in there probably more than most assistant coaches would be in a weight room. And this is a long story, but we had a GA at the time. He was a strength conditioning GA who had played football at Sam Houston. His name was Benny Wiley. And where's Benny Wiley today? Benny Wiley's Lincoln Riley's strength coach at USC.
USC. Oh,
he was at Oklahoma. He'd been at Texas, Tennessee. But anyway, at the time, Benny is our GA. He had been a running back at Sam Houston, and he was like a lot of players. He was getting his master's, and that's where he was getting it, was in the weight room. Well, Benny gets hired by the Dallas Cowboys to come be an assistant on their strength staff. So after Benny's first year there, he calls back down to me. We become friends, over the course of a couple of years, and says, "Hey, I know, especially with me gone, you're probably back in that weight room way more than you ought to be. If you would like to come up here and learn a little bit more of the how and the why, we've got an internship that'll run from the draft through the training camp, and you can come up here and learn." And we only had one scholarship to give. That was before the transfer portal, and you usually knew going into each season how many you had to give. And usually if you had one to give, maybe one guy quit, and you wouldn't end up having more than two or three. But we only had one to give that next year, and so Coach Marlin agreed to let me go up there and spend the summer with the Cowboys. Well, I go up there and spend the summer with the Cowboys, and at the end of fall camp, I'm about to go back to Huntsville, and our head strength coach at Dallas at the time, Joe Jurassic, brings me in and just says, "Hey, we love what you've done for us all summer. Talk to Jerry. He loves it. Like, if you would like to stay, we'll create a position for you to stay."
wow.
And so, but the thing is, like, I know I'm not going to be a football strength coach. I'm 6'4", 195 pounds. I don't look like a football strength coach, and I'm never going to get hired as a football strength coach. But this is, 2001. And, Joe says, "Darby, within 5 to 10 years, every NBA team every high major basketball team is going to have their own guy. Just the way football does, this thing is headed in that direction. And he said, with your background as a player and a coach, if you can tie this strength thing into a ribbon, you'll have your ticket written. And to be honest, I wasn't even sure at the time, I mean, he's telling me this, in my mind, some ways, he's got another hand that's willing to work hard. So why not figure out how to keep him for another year? And, but it was go back to Huntsville, Texas and Sam Houston State, or spend another year in the Cowboys in Dallas. And, that was Emmett and those guys. George Teague was on the, we even had some Bama guys that, were on the team then. Tony Dixon was with us then. And so I was enjoying being in Dallas along with the strength side. So as silly as it sounds now, it kind of come down to, where do you want to be this year? And you want to be in Huntsville, Texas? Do you want to be in Dallas, Texas? And I decided just to give it a shot. And,
Yeah.
We went through the next year, and before the next season barely got going, South Carolina had an opportunity to hire a strength coach, and they reached out to some people. Anyway, just like Joe said, within a year, I'm headed to Columbia to work for Dave Odom. 2 years later, Kelvin Sampson is coming, reached out, and now he brings me to Oklahoma. And exactly what Joe said would happen with, the basketball strength thing happened. And, it's really worked out well for me and my family.
Well, I know I was looking some of the stops you talked about: South Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Memphis, now Texas, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the players that you've helped across your career were like Blake Griffin, Robert Williams, Chris Middleton, James Wiseman, and you worked with some elite athletes that have gone on to the NBA. But let me ask one last coaching question from this standpoint. During your 20 plus career, did you go back for more education classes? What have you how did you keep learning every year? Where did you develop this?
So that was the hard part for me, and that's, even today it's probably the hardest part for me. So, most of the guys in my profession, they knew in college they wanted to be, they're exercise science majors, biology, whatever it is, they've patterned their, their undergrad and then their graduate degrees towards strength conditioning. I had a English major that we doubled into a CJ double major, so that I would have some background for writing and then knowing a little bit about. So if we went to law school, that we've kind of checked both boxes. And so I really had to spend a unbelievable amount of time at, 28, 29, 30 years old, trying to learn the science of the body, kind of backwards. And I don't want to say good. The coaching side always came naturally to me. But I did have to go back, when I like to say the sponge is already kind of full, and try to, try to pour in, basically being a strength coach now is, it's definitely not going to med school, but you have to get to know the anatomy and how everything works, and, I know it would have been a lot easier for me to learn it at 20 than it was at 30. But I think it's been kind of what has helped me along the way is I've always kept it pretty simple and kind of leaned into proven, proven mechanisms to help kids get better, and then just really coached them up hard and use the coaching side and the relationship side to basically just try to get the best out of the kids I've worked with. And, it's turned out pretty good for us.
I know we need to wrap it up because you need to beat the Austin traffic, but let me circle back to Alabama basketball. I want to ask this question. I've been thinking about this one. So during your 20 plus career as a coach, and you've been at some high level schools, how or what did you do to at least kind of somewhat keep up with what your alma mater was doing on the hard court? Or were you able to keep up with as much as you want? Or I've talked to a lot of former players. The mainstay seems to be, a lot of times during game time, there's group texts and things like that. What have you done in the last 20 years just to kind of peek in and see and keep up with Alabama? Obviously, you're back in the SEC now, so you're going to see Alabama just like when you're at South Carolina. But um, uh, what have you what have you seen, and how have you kept up with the team these last couple of decades?
Okay, so it's a lot harder when you're in the profession to keep up with like your alma mater. I always laughed and I was glad when, football was doing so well because wherever I was, whether it was, Oklahoma, A&M, once Saban got that thing rolling, it was like, you're pulling for the school you're working at every Saturday, but it's almost like you knew Alabama football was going to win. So even if, you know, I'm at A&M, they don't win, I could still lay my head on my pillow on Saturday night knowing Saban got us a win. And so the football side was always easy. The hard part with basketball is you're playing on the same nights. You're playing,
Yeah.
it got a little bit easier, uh, when A&M was in SEC because you're having to keep up with the other SEC teams. Uh, I think the 2 years I was at Memphis and the 2 years I was at Texas Tech were a little bit harder because, you're not, that's there, it's never part of your scouting report. You're spending so much time on your own team. Almost the only thing you're watching, especially when you get into conference play, is your other conference teams. And so it gets to be a little bit harder. I was lucky some people kind of brokered a relationship between me and Coach Oates. And so we text back and forth. And as they've
Oh,
really built this thing I'll send him congratulatory text or good luck text. And, and as if they've won, obviously, and been able to play deep into the tournament, a couple seasons we've been done, it's allowed me to watch them even more. And so there's been years when I've been, know everything going on at Alabama. And then there's been years where, it's really hard except checking, my phone after games to see where they won or not. Uh, and then I guess you would say during the dark years, I probably didn't watch as much. But it's just, that's kind of how it goes.
so this past year, the Final Four run, the one that no one saw coming, that finally, luck came to our side on this one. But were you a part of any group texts or any messaging going on during the tournament run?
Yeah, I was a part of one really big group text that pretty much encompasses those teams you talked about.
All right.
That where we were texting back, it probably, it's one that is always there. I'd have to dig into my phone, but it fires up during the season a little bit more, and then, during the tournament, it got obviously red hot. And it was funny because some of the guys on the group text were, all of a sudden they're at the game, and they, on the group text they never said, I'm headed that way or whatever, and then to see them, even on your page on the Twitter page or X or whatever we are now, to see some of those guys at the uh, at the stadium and stuff was really neat.
I can tell you, so when I was out there in Phoenix, of course, when I was flying out of Birmingham, they had some direct flights Delta had set up. And of course, it's nothing but Alabama people going there. But all I heard sitting on the plane was everyone, I heard it from so many people. What they said was, I always said if Alabama ever made it to the Final Four, I would find a way to get out there. So by golly, everyone did. But, before Alabama played, I managed to go over there. I saw Richard Hendricks, so I went over there and talked to Richard, but he was part of that whole alumni club over there. I got to tell you, that was one of the greatest things I've ever seen. You had players and coaches from all generation right there together that came out there to watch Alabama. So that meant a lot to me just to see that. What did it mean to you as a former player, someone who participated in the program at then its height, to see Alabama basketball finally back and then get to a place that we all thought we would never get?
Well, I don't think we ever thought we'd never get there. I think maybe there were years that you thought it's going to be a hill to climb again after being so close. Uh, but I think there's a definite sense of pride because, it's like everything else. And until you've been to a Final Four, and, now it becomes, now we have to win one. But, and you can't consider, and, Bama is what it is. Just like I'm at Texas right now, we could win 10 national championships and Texas is still a football school. Bama
Yeah.
can win 10 national championships. It's a football school, but there's an unbelievable, proud, great tradition of basketball at some of these schools. But until you can hang a banner in your gym that says Final Four, it's hard to, outside of your own program, make that claim and have people take you serious. And I think now, you have to take Alabama serious as not only a team that was good, but the way coach has them going now, I mean, there's no reason to see, I mean, I could see them being in two more Final Fours in the next 5 years as long as, coach is at the helm.
Well, I know for a lot of people, they waited a long time for last year, which came out of the blue. And again, I was so I was so thrilled to see the interaction from so many former players and longtime fans and coaches just to get so energized by what happened in that NCAA tournament run. And again, Darby, I want to thank you again for taking time to do the podcast with me. This was a fantastic conversation, which I knew it would be because, like I said, you and I were in school together. So I know what era you lived through, what era you lived through and experienced. It was a great time for Alabama basketball. And I can tell you, it means a lot to some of the older fans like myself and even the baby boomers to see Alabama basketball relevant again because there was about a 10-year period when it wasn't. And it was really tough for us because we remember what the program had been and could be. So it was tough to accept where we're at. So I promise you, no one here is taking for granted what's been going on the last 4 or 5 years. So we look forward to hopefully more great runs. But again, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to wish you nothing but the best of luck because you've been at some great places. And man, you are at you should have all the resources you need at the University of Texas. I can tell you that.
Well, it's not unlike Alabama. It's a great place with great tradition, and they care about every sport here. And I think that's one thing that's happened, at Alabama now. I mean, I think when I was there, football hit it a little low, but football's football at Alabama. But we were good. Gymnastics were good. I think Rick Moody had a run there with the women with Niecy Johnson and those that were good. But now you look at Alabama and they're going to be right there for the big trophy, and every sport is good. And I think Texas has a lot of the same qualities at both schools where there's great resources and every sport is expected to be good.
Well, if I can ever make it out to Austin, if Alabama plays out there on a Saturday in basketball, and I can get out there, I'm going to try to see if I can at least run into you in Melbourne. I want to come say hi to you guys in person again.
That'd be great for all of us.
All right, Darby, thanks again. Best of luck to the upcoming season. And I know you got to get your family moved down here in the next week or so from Memphis. So good luck with that move too on that.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.